Video people, today we are going to talk about James Joyce. So let's do it. Here we go. This is James Joyce. If I were to briefly summarize his character for you, I would say that he was a genius. He was just really naturally gifted and smart. In particular, he could learn language really easily, and I'm going to talk about this later, but he also played with conventions of language. But in his life, he could speak, I think, 17 different languages, including Arabic, Sanskrit, Greek, Italian. He read plays by a Norwegian author whose name I can't pronounce correctly, so I'm not going to pronounce his name. And he wanted to read the plays in Norwegian, so he learned to speak Norwegian easily. He also attended school in France. He attended medical school in France for a while, so he was listening to medical lectures in French. And I don't know if I said this, he was from Ireland originally. He was from Dublin, Ireland, born and raised. So he just was a really naturally smart, gifted person. When he was little in school, he excelled in language, in philosophy, anything involving literature, and any really literary endeavor he excelled at. He was also a really accomplished musician. He won prizes for vocal work. He could play the guitar, he played the piano, he composed his own melodies, so he was just a really super smart person. But he was also and this is not due solely to his intelligence, it's also due to the crazy life that he had, which I'll talk about. But he also had weird sort of afflictions. So he was terrified of dogs, his whole life. He had an intense phobia of dogs. He's also really scared of thunderstorms. So he was super smart, really gifted at understanding language, but also kind of troubled in his own way. And we will begin to uncover some of the reasons why he was troubled. Starting in his childhood, first, look at this picture though. He is serving you face, he is serving you attitude, sailor collar on fleek. Look at him. It's a lot of sass for young James Joyce right here. But his childhood was not super sassy, though. He was born in Ireland. Like I said, he was born in Dublin, and that's important. When you think James Joyce, you think Dublin, you think Ireland. I wanted to actually do him this week because it's supposed to be St. Patrick's Day someday. I never know when St. Patrick's Day is, but it's someday, maybe when you're listening to this, it's St. Patrick's Day. So, hey, I did a fun thing. Alright, so, what was I saying? Oh, he was born in Dublin. He was one of 10 children, so that's stressful in and of itself. His dad married his mother, obviously, and his mom came from a wealthy family, so his dad married her and he inherited that wealth, but his dad was a drunk, I think is the politically correct way to say that. Drunk. He was drunk all the time. He drank. He was an alcoholic. And he didn't really know how to handle the finances, so they were just, always living in poverty, basically. And he had 9 other siblings. I think 2 died, so I think maybe there were 12 children that were born. 2 died. His dad was an alcoholic. They were always living just barely scraping by. His mom was described as quiet. I mean, I think she was probably depressed. Described sort of as quiet. She was a devout Catholic, so I think in some ways maybe she had sort of given up, and I don't know, an article I read, the author said that she was kind of came to terms with what her life on earth was like, and she was always sort of all of her hopes were pinned on having a better afterlife, so that's super chipper, that's super cheerful to grow up amongst. So he's got this alcoholic dad, this distant mom who's just basically waiting to die so her life will be good. One of 10 siblings. But he did do well in school. Like I said, he was really good in anything literary. At one point, though, he was kicked out of his school because his dad didn't have any money, he couldn't pay anymore, so they kicked him out of school. Then he was like homeschooled for a little bit, and then he got accepted into a different school. But it was this stressful, sort of traumatic childhood in which he was exposed to a lot of things that he probably shouldn't have been exposed to. But he's still, like, I think he was 6 here. Still very sassy in spite of all of that. Then we get to his young adulthood. I don't know, his beard's a little scraggly, but kind of a babe, maybe. James Joyce was a babe? I don't know. As a young adult? Sure. I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it. His young adulthood was equally as stressful. So he went to college in Dublin, but then he left to France to attend medical school. And then he got a really brief telegram? Is that what it is? Telegram? Like a letter, but a telegram? Anyhow, a note from his father saying basically it was just like, your mother's dying, come home, bye. So he went back to Ireland, and his mom passed away. She had cancer, I believe. So he is having a rough, he's like in his 20s now. He starts drinking heavily himself. He's an alcoholic. Doesn't have any stable work. He's trying to like, scrape together odd jobs to kind of fund like his drinking and to, you know, help him find some place to stay. He's just basically living like paycheck to paycheck and drinking. He tried to publish some works, but they got rejected then. So things were not great for him, and his mom just died. He met his wife, though, a couple years after his mother dies. And he leaves Ireland shortly after he meets her. I like the story. It just kind of tells you his character. Like, I think he was wild. He sounds pretty wild. Like, he comes back and he's drinking. His mom just dies and he's drinking. And he's trying to scrape together odd jobs. And so he was staying at different friends' houses. And I think he might have gotten sick. And he stayed at one of his friends' houses. And he leaves because another person that was staying at that house, like he got in fights, I think, that was not uncommon, but another person that was staying at the house brought a pistol and shot at pans, like cookware, that were hanging above James Joyce's head, which is like super weird. But then he was like, well, that's it, I'm out of here. So takes his wife, they go bounce around Europe doing like kind of odd jobs. And they have some kids. I know of one kid. But I think that they had more than one kid. Just pretend like they did. He comes back to Ireland once, gets in a fight with his publisher, and never goes back. Even though his dad and some of his siblings had kind of begged him to come back, he never returned. Because obviously for him, Dublin held a lot of really, traumatic memories. But what you should know about his childhood and his young adulthood and his time in Dublin is that even though he was only there in childhood, he was there, then he went away in college and came back briefly in his young adulthood. Dublin created basically the foundation for all of his works. So everything he wrote about pretty much happened in Dublin. And he said, there was a good quote that I wanted to remember, but I didn't remember. But basically, like, he felt like if he could capture what life was like in Dublin, he could capture a truth about life. Like, he thought that big universal truths were really evident in small towns and interactions with people, and if he could get those correct, then he could create sort of masterpieces that are about just life itself. Does that make sense? I think that makes sense. I don't know. So that's his young adulthood. Religion, here's his tombstone. It's pleasant. But he was like most people now. As we're finding out, most the writers that we've read anyhow have had a complex relationship with religion. So think back to his childhood. He's raised strictly Catholic, and he's got this mom who's kind of resigned to her fate on earth and just hoping, for a better afterlife. And he's got this father who's drunk, and so I don't think like his early exposure to religion was that great. He kind of turned away from the church when he was in college. He refused, when his mother died, he refused to pray at her bedside. When he died, that's why I put the picture of his tombstone right here. His wife, I think a priest asked if he would, if James Joyce's wife, would want him to have a Catholic funeral, and she said, oh no, I couldn't do that to him. So some scholars have suggested that maybe he came around a bit, but he was never, he was raised Catholic, but he certainly didn't identify as a practicing Catholic in his adult life when he had a choice. So that's what you need to know about that, I think. So as a writer, that's really why you need to know Joyce. He was fun. Like, he just took a lot of risks. And like I said at the beginning, that he trusted his genius where a lot of people didn't, because he didn't write like conventional work. He wrote stories that often didn't have a plot that you could even decipher. He would make up words. He was, I don't know if you've heard of like a stream of consciousness, but he sort of invented that, which is just a stream of writing with no punctuation, to try to put you in the like rambling mind of a character. His work often was like a puzzle, a mystery, where there were just layers and layers of meaning. You can't read his main works, which are Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake, I think, without being instructed, really, because, I don't know, he said that he wanted to, like, imbue these layers of meaning into his work so that scholars would study him for a long time. And it worked. It's true. So he was just really creative and distinct and ahead of his time. He was also known as a really lyrical writer. And people say, rarely does a writer sound better when you read them out loud than when you read to yourself. But he's often considered as a writer whose works need to be read aloud, but not in class, but on your own time if you want. And because he was a musician, people think that's what gave his prose, his writing, like a really musical, lyrical quality. So he paid attention to how words sounded. Short sentences with long sentences, the sound that words make when you hear them. They even did, like, I think there's been concerts where it's just people reading his work to music. So that's kind of fun. Anything else I want to say about him? Nope, I think that's it. Alright, so we will be reading Araby in class. I think that you will like it or you won't like it. Doesn't matter though. Okay? We'll see you in class. Bye. Stop.